Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. Amid the ongoing Russia-Ukraine peace talks, Russian President Vladimir Putin has warned that Russia will take full control of Ukraine's Donbas region by force unless Ukrainian forces withdraw. Russian President Putin has said that talks with US envoy Steve Witkoff on the US proposed peace plan was useful. He also said that the US divided 27 points of plan into 4 packages and proposed to discuss them separately. After US envoy Steve Witkoff's meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin on the peace plan to end the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, US President has said that the talks were reasonably good, while further emphasizing on his push for peace. Putin is set to embark on his 2-day visit to India starting today. The two leaders will attend an annual summit held by both the countries. French President Emmanuel Macron is in China for high-stakes talks with the Chinese counterpart. While speaking on the meeting, Macron says the two countries must overcome their differences. Italian police have raided 13 major fashion brands, including Versace, Prada, Gucci, Adidas. Italy is seeking governance and supply chain documents. The European Union Commission has launched a new antitrust probe into Meta over its use of AI features on WhatsApp, marking the latest regulatory crackdown on big tech. The investigation, which follows a parallel Italian probe amid growing European Union scrutiny of generative AI and Meta's expanding influence in the digital market. The European Commission unveiled new measures to cut the bloc's heavy reliance on Chinese metals, including possible mandatory diversification rules and faster deployment of trade tools such as anti-dumping. The plan seeks to boost European Union economic security after current geopolitics expose their supply chain vulnerabilities. And viewers, let's focus on the top story this hour. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has said that European countries should focus on contributing to a settlement of the conflict in Ukraine. Putin reiterated that territories currently held by Ukrainian forces would either be taken over militarily or Ukrainian troops will leave them, adding that Russia intends to secure control over the Donbas region by military means or otherwise. Putin has described the search for a resolution to the Ukraine crisis as a difficult task. He's also said the United States has divided the 27 points of President Trump's plan into 4 separate negotiation packages to further break down the process. While some points were unacceptable to Moscow, Putin has said that they were discussed during talks with the US visiting delegation. He has also added that the proposals brought to Moscow were based on his earlier discussions with Trump in Alaska. Commenting on his meeting with developers Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, Putin mentioned that the talks were very useful, though he noted it was too early to say what the outcome might be. He explained that the meeting ran longer than expected because he had to go over practically every point. All right, viewers, crucial developments there from Putin also, but central to note here how Putin has declared that Moscow intends to seize full control of Ukraine's Donbas region through military force unless Ukraine troops withdrew. Now, that's a demand that Kyiv, of course, continues to reject unequivocally. Now, the declaration was made in an interview published on Thursday, and it follows Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. All right, and I'd now welcome Ambassador Veena Sikri, former diplomat from New Delhi, live in this discussion.
Good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for joining us here at NewsX World, and we appreciate you giving us your time. Now, both parties, both Trump and Putin, the statements are coming in that talks that were held were productive, but clearly we don't see a breakthrough. We already know that about 20% of Ukraine is under Russian control now. And Putin goes on to further warn of taking over Donbass as well. How do you assess the situation? Where does this stop until a peace plan is adopted?
Well, I think that the 28-point peace plan put forward by President Trump after his meeting in Alaska with President Putin, that's a good starting point. And I think the fact that they've broken it down into 4 packages and they intend to continue the talks, that's also a positive sign going ahead. But one must understand the reasoning behind what President Putin is saying, because the control of the Donbass is a reflection of something that happened, a process that began more than 10, 11 years ago. Right. And I would say even before that, because the Russian-speaking people living in Ukraine, in the Donbass region, have always had these problems from the Ukrainian authorities ever since the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991. But 11 years ago, there were agreements, there were talks, and President Zelensky himself got elected on the campaign promise that he would move towards the implementation of the Minsk Accords and that he would bring a viable solution. But when he did not, then the Donbass region people themselves declared independence and said, they had a referendum and they said what they wanted to do. So I think that one has to go back into what happened. And if I look at even what happened in 2022, it followed upon a strategic agreement between Ukraine and USA. And in this strategic agreement, they had agreed on cooperating in counting Russia. So I think that looking at both sides, one has to be very pragmatic in finding a viable solution. India has always been in favor of a solution through dialogue and diplomacy. We have always called for an end to the hostilities and a cessation of violence and war. And I think that President Putin's forthcoming visit to India, which is beginning a short while from now, will be very significant because among others, this will surely be discussed. And it is important, special and privileged strategic partnership that exists between Russia and India. And it has been there for more than, the good relations, the strong partnership has been there for well over 7 decades and more. So let's see what happens during President Putin's visit to India. I think it's significant because President Putin has expressed his willingness to, develop the relationship with India as much as India wants to develop it. So he's, from his side, signaling the importance of his visit and the importance of the relationship with India. And he's signaling also that this relationship between Russia and India stands on its own. It's a relationship that is going to develop on its own. It does not depend on any other relationship that either the USA or Russia or China or India have, So I think this is a very important reaffirmation of India's strategic autonomy and India's willingness to play a positive and strong role in finding a solution to the imbroglio in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. We very hope that these peace talks will continue and they will carry on well.
Right. Ambassador Sikri, now Prime Minister Modi has continued to maintain how India is on the side of peace and has pushed for both parties to follow the path of peace and stop the war. This time around, when Putin is to arrive in India, what's the message that India will be giving in addition to what has already been told?
India will certainly discuss the situation in detail. I'm sure we will be waiting to hear from President Putin about his talks, with President Trump's envoys in Moscow very recently. And we are looking forward to actually carrying it forward and playing this role that will bring all sides together on the basis of understanding. President Zelensky has himself been in touch with Prime Minister Modi and, has conveyed his views as well. We do know that the European countries do not want to have a conclusive agreement at this stage. And once again, as happened before in 2022, when Prime Minister Boris Johnson advised President Zelensky not to conclude the deal with President Putin, it was very close to an agreement. agreement, and it was a much better situation than it is today. But now that again the Europeans are doing this, UK and Germany and France are all again saying no, we must have various kinds of different agreements. So I think that we are going to see a situation where India is going to push in every way possible to see whether a solution can be arrived at. Among other things, of course, the bilateral relationship between India and Russia will be very much discussed and on the cards, and many developments are expected on that front also, in trade, in defense cooperation, and so on.
All right, I requested to stay on with us, Ambassador Sikri. There's some more news in continuation to what you've been telling our viewers. Let's reiterate that while himself reiterating his stance with the European Union, Putin has said that European countries should play a constructive role in efforts to reach a peace settlement in Ukraine rather than interfere in the process. Now, Putin's remarks emphasized his view that Europe has the capacity to influence the trajectory of the conflict, but is currently doing so in a counterproductive way. He argued that meaningful European involvement would require supporting diplomatic initiatives rather than escalating tension or obstructing negotiations. And I now request Ms. Ambassador, former diplomat Meena Sikri, to join us back into the discussion here. Ambassador Sikri, we were just discussing about the European Union's role, and you were talking about how Boris Johnson had warned against concluding a proposal to Zelensky. Now, the involvement of Europe in the peace plan is absolutely crucial, but Putin has time and again said that Europe appears not to be on the side of peace. And the European Union is constantly lobbying for a better plan for Zelensky. How important is Europe's role here for both parties to arrive at a peace deal?
I would say quite clearly that the solution has to come between President Putin and President Zelensky. That is very important. I think President Trump is playing a very active role, and he's willing to underwrite it very substantially. We must remember that it is President Trump who is sending the weaponry to NATO, and they are giving it to President Zelensky. So I think that Europe itself has not been that much involved in giving the huge amounts of weaponry that President Trump has nowhere near the scale of what President Trump has been giving to President Zelensky and to Ukraine. So I think Europe has to be realistic about it. And on their own, given the state of their economies, given the state of the situation in Europe, they are not in a position now to step up in any way their direct military aid or any kind of financial support for Zelensky. So I think this is the reality of the situation. And I think President Trump's peace plan does offer the best hope. And I think the progress made in the talks between Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner and President Putin is an important signal that there is hope, and we should push ahead with that hope. I don't think we should let any individual countries or group of countries come up with their own peace plan. It's not going to help, and it's not realistic because they don't have the ability to defend that also, or to give President Zelensky the direct aid that he's looking for. There's a huge amount of aid that President Zelensky needs for reconstruction and rebuilding the shattered Ukrainian economy. So I think that itself should be the focus without getting worse and worse into military tackle that Ukraine is facing, and to allow that to continue would not be correct.
But the Europe solution to that is the use of the frozen sovereign Russian assets, and Russia is definitely not going to be allowing that. So where is that aid going to come for Zelensky?
Together, I think using Russia's frozen assets is out of the question, because that's something that the whole world will oppose, because it could happen to any country at any time. And to think that assets that you've kept in a certain currency are then going to be frozen and used against you is not an active encouragement or a good sign at all of what can be done with the global economy or individual bilateral relationships. So I think that should really not be coming into the picture at all. But I think that first of all, we should look at the end of the hostilities. We should look at the end of the war. We should look at dialogue and diplomacy to implement whatever part of President Trump's plan is feasible. And that will take us to where the next stage, which is the reconstruction. But right now, we cannot even talk of that till we bring an end to the hostilities.
All right, I requested to stay on further with us, so we're now going to talk further about Putin's India visit. Now, viewers, let's remind you once again that Putin begins a key visit to India this week. In fact, just in a few hours, he is expected to arrive in New Delhi. His trip begins with a private dinner hosted by Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India. The two leaders are expected to review the full range of the India-Russia strategic partnership, from defense and energy to trade, technology and regional security, including the Indo-Pacific and Eurasia. On Friday, Putin will pay tribute at Rajghat before receiving a ceremonial welcome at Rashtrapati Bhavan. He will then hold summit talks with Prime Minister Narendra Modi at Hyderabad House, followed by a working lunch. Putin will also address the India-Russia Business Forum and attend the launch of RT's India operations. The day ends with a state banquet hosted by President Draupadi Murmu before Putin departs later in the evening. Now, several key agreements and a joint statement are expected during the visit. And I would now request our guests to join us back, but before they are back, viewers, let's also tell you that Russian president has said that India can no longer be treated as a colony, praising the country as a serious power with a strong and independent global voice. In an interview, Putin said the world has now seen that India is not the nation that it was 77 years ago when it gained independence. He added that Prime Minister Modi is a leader who never compromises India's national interests. Putin further described Modi's positions as firm and clear, saying he works only to safeguard India's legitimate interests. The Indian people can be proud of their leader, Putin said, emphasizing Moscow's view of New Delhi as an increasingly influential global actor. All right, I now request Ambassador Sikri to join us back in the discussion here. Ambassador Sikri, words of praise coming in for Prime Minister Narendra Modi from Putin once again. But let's talk about his 30-hour India itinerary. There are going to be a slew of summits, private dinners, and negotiations on trade, defense, and much more. In fact, what do you think are going to be some of the key talking points when the two leaders meet today? All right, viewers, there's some connection issue with our guest that we are facing. We're trying to fix that glitch, but let's remind you once again that in about a few moments from now, Putin is expected to arrive in New Delhi, and he will be hosted by Prime Minister Modi for a private dinner at his residence at 7 Lok Kalyan Marg. And in fact, this visit also marks 25 years of strategic partnership between India and Russia, making the visit extremely significant for both the nations. I would now request Shruti Das Gupta, international affairs expert, to join us in the discussion here. Thank you, Shruti, for joining us. Now, significant day today as far as India-Russia relations are concerned. Putin is once again back in India. Of course, timing of his visit is extremely significant given that US and Russia and Ukraine are discussing a potential peace plan to establish imminent ceasefire in the war. But as far as India and Russia are concerned, there's going to be a lot on the agenda during Putin's visit. There's going to be discussion of this defense, trade. Talk to us about some of the key talking points that we can expect.
Well, the first of it is going to be the energy infrastructure and the energy cooperation, which is where Russia depends on India to keep up the demand for its crude oil while trying to find ways to mitigate the threat of sanctions, as well as while Rosneft and Lukoil are still under sanction, they're trying to find other ways of ship-to-ship transfers and other ways to ensure that the Russian crude oil stays in the market, Russia's economy stays healthy via the sale of the crude oil. So that is one which India is looking at. The other is that the nuclear energy cooperation. Russia is helping India build KNPP, a nuclear power plant in Tamil Nadu, where Unit 1 and 2 are already functioning. 3 is in pre-startup phase, and 4, 5, and 6 are under construction. So that is going to help India move towards its green energy part. The small modular reactors is also something that India is looking for in terms of technology transfer, as well as help in skill building, as well as installation in different various ways into its defense as well as its in energy infrastructure. Defense is, of course, one of the major factors that is being very widely talked about, with S-400s, S-500s, 2 batteries of, I believe, 2 units of S-400s have been ordered. S-500 cooperation, technology transfer is under consideration. Su-57 aircrafts have been talked about. So there are, that is a larger battery of defense infrastructure building. While Make in India is happening, we know that 70% of the indigenous Indian military market is dependent on Russian technology. So that shows that this is a deeper strategic cooperation between these two nations, which is not built today, which has its cooperation built over decades. The visit is new because it is after the beginning of the Ukraine war, but before that, it was an alternate year system since 2000, I believe. The PMs of both nations have been, PM and President of Russia have been alternatively visiting these nations. What coincides this time is the Russia-India summit, that business summit that is happening while Putin is visiting. So whatever deals and MOUs that we're expecting would have wheels in motion already on ground. So the business would be already in place. People who are actually going to implement those MOUs would be talking to each other directly. This is an annual summit. This happens every year. But this year, Putin is in India, and that's what makes it a little bit of an opportunity for those who want to take things faster. Beyond that, India is looking for opening up Russian markets to its agriculture, pharmaceuticals, as well as skilled labor. And these are something that Russia is willing to cooperate with India on. So hopefully this is going to be a multi-level program, because there is a trade deficit. The rupee Vostro accounts are kind of stuck because there's a trade imbalance. Most of the trade, which is a $70 billion trade, that is of 2025, about 64 billion of it is spent completely by Russia's towards Russia's side. There's a huge imbalance. India is only owning up to about 5 billion at most. So we need to step up our game, and for that we need extra energy markets. This will also help India offset some of these sanctions and restriction to markets that we're facing via USA. So it is a multi-layer deal that we're looking at. Hopefully both the nations will come out in this win-win situation.
For sure. Thank you, Shruti, for weighing in with your comments there. We do stay on. There's some more news coming in, viewers. Dmitry Medvedev, while speaking in Moscow, said that if the European Union goes ahead with the plans to use the frozen Russian funds, Moscow could view the move as a casus belli, essentially a justification for war. His comments follow a European Commission proposal to tap those assets or borrow against them, raise roughly 90 billion euros for Ukraine. The funds would help support Kyiv's military and keep basic services running as the conflict drags on. Medvedev accused the European Union of attempting to steal Russian money under what he calls a false banner of reparations. And let's bring back Shruti into the discussion here. Shruti, of course, this is not anything unexpected. We can't expect Russia to allow for the European Union to use its frozen sovereign assets to rebuild the destruction that Ukraine has gone through. So what's the alternative? What is the European Union going to do if those funds are not used?
Two things, one of which is that all the EU nations have to vote for it. So if the pro-Russian factions do not vote, this does not come to fruition. They are, and the second one is if it does go to vote and it does happen, then there is a provision, I believe it's called Article 122 of the EU, where they are going to build a safety net by saying that Russia cannot ask for this money back once the peace deal is in effect, because asking for this money back immediately would break the financial backbone of the EU. So there are a lot of legalese around it. They are trying their very best to ensure that the cost of war for Russia gets higher and higher with each day. They had also done something like this under the G7, I think around that was about 40 billion euros were already sanctioned. So that is also going to be part of the repayment process of this. So the total cost is going to become something much higher than what the 95 billion that they're talking about. It does look very shady, doesn't it? When you are asked to, then your private state accounts are not just frozen, but they are being used without your permission to empower your enemy. They're not being kept away. So this is directly funding the war against Russia. So Russian money against Russia is not something that sends a good message. And I hope that EU understands that they're playing with fire.
For sure. Thank you, Shruti, for speaking to us. For now, we'll do keep coming back to you as Putin arrives in India later today. But viewers, let's tell you some breaking news coming in now. The European Union has launched an antitrust probe into Meta, focusing on its rollout of new AI features in WhatsApp. The European Commission expressed concerns that Meta's recently announced policy could block third-party AI providers from offering services through the messaging platform. Regulators will examine whether this move violates European Union competition rules, which aim to ensure a fair digital market. The investigation highlights growing scrutiny of major tech companies as they integrate AI into widely used platforms, balancing innovation with the market fairness and consumer choice. Meta has yet to comment on the probe. Moving on, viewers, the Eurovision Song Contest now faces a battle for its future at a watershed meeting in Geneva. Organizers and participating countries will debate whether Israel should be allowed to continue in the competition. This comes amid protests over the way its government conducted its war in Gaza and accusations of unfair voting practices. Countries including Ireland, Spain, the Netherlands, and Slovenia have said they will boycott Eurovision if Israel participates. Germany has indicated it will pull out if Israel is excluded. Now, during this year's grand final in Basel in Switzerland, two people attempted to storm the stage and throw paint over Israel's contestant Yuval Raphael. They were stopped by crew members and later arrested. Now, Raphael eventually took a second place in the contest after a convincing victory in the public vote.